Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. Let's talk about the post office. Will it be privatized? What does that mean? We're going to be talking with Christopher Shaw, about that. And I cannot wait to hear his thoughts because I have been really captivated by an article that he wrote in the Capitol Hill Citizen. Of course, we had Russell McIver from that wonderful paper on Reverend Jackson's Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson radio show not too long ago, just a few weeks ago. DeJoy Slow's DeMail. I love it. I love plays on words, but you got to get this book. I've ordered several of them for my family. First Class, the U.S. Postal Service, Democracy, and the Corporate Threat. I really embrace this topic, looking at the Black middle class, looking at it from that perspective, the Black working middle class, because both of my stepfathers were mailmen. After the Second World War, they were able to secure those jobs. And those jobs really stabilized my father and mother's families. And it opened the doors for them to go to college. Well, for home ownership, it opened the doors for them to go to college. These have always been good, solid jobs. And this is something because Black people had been shut out of the corporate world. They were really able to get a toehold into financial stability and prosperity through good government jobs. But it's not just Black people. This has been really the backbone of the American middle class. And so now what's going to happen if this push that quite frankly has come from Democrats and Republicans to privatize the U.S. Postal Service? What happens if this comes into being? President Donald Trump has said that he's confirmed that his administration plans to move forward with plans to look at the privatization of the U.S. Postal Service. Well, Christopher Shaw, what does that mean? What does that mean? First of all, what does it mean? Why don't we just step back and look at the U.S. Postal Service and its importance to us all? Thank you, Benjamin Franklin.
Well, that's right. Yeah, Benjamin Franklin was the first Postmaster General, and the Postal Service actually is older than the nation itself. It was founded in 1775, so the revolution's underway, but independence has not been declared yet on July 4th of the following year in 1776. So it has this very long history, and throughout its history, it has sought and succeeded in serving the entire nation on a very equal basis. So it's really rests on this public service principle. That's what it's about. And it's not a for-profit business. It's never operated like a for-profit business. It would not function if it was a for-profit business, because there's lots of people who business that's looking to make a profit just would not serve. And so that's why privatization is such a threat, and really just a rejection of that principle that our post office has been based on for over 200 years now.
Well, you've looked at the corporate threat through your book. What is the corporate threat? Because it seems that the oligarchs are running the place. You know, Senator Dick Durbin said that when Goldman Sachs demanded 770, what was it, billion? They'd already gotten more than $20 trillion from us by that point. But he said, look, the bankers run the place. It was almost as if he said it with an air of resignation, just and almost defeat. He looked deflated in 2008 when he said this. But what about this corporate threat to the U.S. public postal service? Because in fact, you have said that this repudiates their public service mission.
That's right. It absolutely does.
So what is it when you say that the U.S. Postal Service has a public service mission? What do you mean?
Well, if you look at the actual law, the basic principle and purpose of the Postal Service is, it doesn't say to deliver envelopes from, X city to Y city, or to move boxes from here to there. What it says is to bind the nation together. And so The idea here is that it's an agency, a federal agency that exists to make sure we're connected with one another and we're on the same page in terms of there's information that's being disseminated this way that, newspapers and magazines traditionally, we could read them and be well informed as voters and as citizens, and we're able to stay in touch with one another. So it's about creating a way for us to connect with the people who are close to us, but also at the same time being part of the same sort of civic and political community as a nation. And that's really what the Postal Service is about and has been its purpose throughout history. And that does not work on a for-profit basis.
Well, and I guess, in revolutions, the first mechanisms they seize is a communication system. And many of us, I certainly can't take myself back to the 1700s. I can't. I can't think about it. But that was how we communicated, right? By post.
That's
And
right.
please explain that, because I think we're so accustomed to these modern conveniences that, if we have brownouts or blackouts, we freak out. It's certainly in the United States. But the post is a reliable way still of getting in touch with people. If you don't trust, say, the safety of these open airwaves through which we're communicating right now, you try to send a letter. The poor man's copyright, all of that. It's a way to communicate. And since 2021, it seems that the efficiency of that has been disrupted.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think one thing about the U.S. mail is that we know it functions. We know it's there. I mean, even when there's a disaster like Hurricane Katrina, pretty soon after that, the mail trucks were rolling again and the mail was being delivered. And one thing I think we learned from 2020 is that, we could rely on the Postal Service. And we were very dependent on it at that time when we were doing shelter in place to get items delivered that we needed. And then also to pull off an election there in 2020. The Postal Service was central to allowing us to cast our votes through the mail, cast those ballots that way. And tens of millions of Americans did it that way. So it's like a sort of in the reserve there when we need it as a nation, and we can't anticipate what's going to happen, but it's just this very vital essential infrastructure that's there that we can use and rely on when we need it. And as you say, unfortunately, since 2021 or so, we have seen its efficiency diminished in unfortunate ways.
Oh, no. You put it so brilliantly. The joy slows the mail. I said, now, you know what? I got to talk to this guy. Help me with that. Because now, and these people work so hard. They work so hard, and you could rely on your postman or your postwoman, your postal worker. And you know them. If you live in a building or if you live in a house, you know them and they know you. And and in fact, it's almost as if they do wellness checks. If they don't see you, if your mail is piling up, they check on you. We absolutely depend upon them. Help me to understand how the joy slowed the mail. I don't want that to be lost on anyone, because really, it's a great article, everybody. It is fantastic. But the joy did slow the mail. And now it begins to break the public trust in the mail system. So it leaves them vulnerable to a takeover, if you will. How has he slowed the mail, and what has been the impact of the service not being as efficient as it has always been?
I think it's very well stated what you said about this undercutting of the public trust in our post office. So what he did is in 2021, it used to be that a first class letter. So, you put that stamp on it and, that's first class mail. And it was delivered anywhere in the country in 3 days. So if
Yeah.
you're mailing some letter in New York City, it will be in California in 3 days. And in closer locations, often delivery was next day. So that's the way it was. And he slowed it down considerably because he changed it from a 1 to 3 day standard to a 3 to 5 day standard. So that's now if you're mailing back and forth, instead of taking a maximum of 6 days, it can take 10 days, which is a pretty big increase, right? I mean, that's just like a 67% increase in the amount of time there. The other thing that happened is that, he said, okay, so we're essentially changing the goalpost here. We're going to make it so that we are reducing, the speed of the mail, but we'll be able to then deliver a larger proportion of it on time using the new standards. But that hasn't even actually happened. So if you look at single piece first class mail, so that's just the mail that you or I, a regular person, puts out, where it's not like a bulk mailing or something like that. Their target is to have that 90% delivered on time. And they've been struggling to keep it around 70% delivered on time for the 3 to 5 day delivery category here. So that's what's going on, is they changed the standard to make it slower, and then are having a hard time meeting the standard. And this is based on setting up this new mechanism for sorting the mail that's going to be based on these 60 new centers, and they've had major issues. If you people live in Atlanta, Georgia, I mean, they've lived through this, where they just have not operated as they should, and so very serious delays in these places where the new centers that Joy wanted were put in place and are up and running. So that's the nutshell version of what's going on in the last couple of years with his plan to restructure the postal system.
Well, I mean, but it has wreaked havoc upon mail delivery, because I mean, people's medicines, they're taking much longer. I mean, this really it's not as simple as getting a letter. And now it's almost forcing you to use something that for many people is unaffordable. Going to, a private courier like FedEx, to get your mail to you, because I know they need it by tomorrow morning at set time. And first class mail used to be that. And now that's over. So it's like it's forcing us. It helps. It's like it's doing a reset on our thinking about efficiency. Because there is, I think, in America, it's like we're losing faith. It seems that the oligarchs want us to lose faith in the public system, and yet they want to seize it. Government doesn't work as efficiently, and yet they want to own it.
I agree. I mean, it's first class, right? I mean, it's first class mail. It was called that for a reason, and it set a standard that Americans expected, and it represented the ability of the federal government to deliver, and to deliver well and efficiently, and serve the people in an effective manner. And that inspires faith in government more broadly, in government programs, and the ability of the public sector to help us all in the society here. And so, with the post office, that's a service that we deal with 6 days a week. I mean, we deal with it on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And when you start to undercut its ability and start to undermine its mission, that has a broader impact, where people look at government services more generally, and they say, can government really deliver? Mm-hmm. Can government be effective? Is government just inherently inefficient? And the thing is, that type of attitude is what the people you call the corporate oligarchs, and I think that's an apt description. That's what they want, because they want to call the shots. They want to run all of these organizations. They want to be in control, and they don't want people to look to government. They want people to look to them. And so I think you're right. I think it is a broader based attack on the public sector in general.
Well, if they do, well, you call this before I ask you this question, let me ask you about your characterization of this as a public portal. What do you mean by that? Because it's like we have redlining in America. We still do. We still have discrimination. If you're selling your house, you put up white photographs so that, people think that a white family lives there so that it'll be assessed a higher value and all of that. I mean, we still do that in the United States today in 2024. Um, but the mail doesn't work that way. You get your mail wherever you are. And you tend to get people delivering your mail who are from the neighborhood, or at least who understand the neighborhood. And they're determined to, through rain, snow, sleet, or hail, get your mail to you. Um, why do you call this a public portal? I mean, because I've seen with your writings that you continue to make this about the public good, Dr. Shaw.
I think the post office it's an actual representative of democracy in our daily lives, because its mission is to serve us all, to serve all Americans, and to serve us all equally. And it doesn't matter if you are a billionaire or you are living in poverty. It doesn't matter if you are black or white. It doesn't matter if you live in a remote rural part of the country or you live in the middle of a major city. Everybody is being served equally. And that is something that a public service does that, for-profit businesses, they don't do. Because the idea with the Postal Service is that it's accessible to everyone, and if you're a private business, you come up with a product that you're trying to target a specific group of consumers, right? I mean, it's just a totally different outlook on what an enterprise should be and what the mission of it is. And so I think that the Postal Service, it really is important just as a representative of democracy at work in our lives. So, it has this sort of philosophical importance to me as a reinforcing the principle of democracy in this country.
Do you take the privatization then of the Postal Service, as an attack upon democracy?
I do. I absolutely do. Because what it's saying is that this democratic principle shouldn't be the guiding philosophy of this major federal agency. Instead, it should shift to, how can we make money off of people?
Mm.
And if this means disenfranchising people, then we're okay with that, right? And if this means price gouging other people, we're okay with that too. It's just a totally different outlook on what the Postal Service is about. And yeah.
What would a privatized U.S. Postal Service look like?
It would mean that a lot of Americans would no longer receive the kind of service that they're expecting. So this would mean that, there's a reason why UPS and FedEx actually in large parts of rural America use the post office to do that last mile of delivery. And that's because they don't want to deliver there because there's no profit in it.
So, do you think we even understand that? How heavily they lean upon? Because we think that really the gold standard has become Amazon. It has become FedEx. But no, they need their default organization is the U.S. Postal Service.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, Amazon.com is very reliant on the Postal Service to get its deliveries there on time, and so there's just large stretches of this country because they're too rural or too remote, and let's not even bring like Alaska into the conversation, for instance. And also poorer neighborhoods would be less attractive to deliver and to serve as well. And so all these places that a for-profit company isn't interested in, by definition, because it's public service, the Postal Service, it has to serve them. It's required to. It exists to be available to those people. And so, that's the threat, and that's what privatization would mean. It would really disenfranchise these people. And as you pointed out, this isn't just letters, right? This is things like medical test samples. It's medicine itself. There's very vital things, ballots in the case of elections. So lots of vital items flow through the mail, in addition to the postcards that we like to send to each other if we're on vacation or something like that. So it really is an essential service that we all rely on to one degree or another.
Where is this privatization effort coming from? And does it matter who's behind it or who is behind it? Who's doing this? Because we keep hearing Oh, the Isley Brothers had this song, Footsteps in the Dark, years and years ago. We just keep hearing little footsteps. And it seems like with every year, I don't care what administration it is, it gets, it seems like we're getting closer and closer to this.
Yeah, no, it's this push has been going on for decades. Definitely by the 1970s, you can see it's underway, and it's really part of sort of the general pro-corporate push that really gets going at that time, and then gathers steam during the Reagan years.
Mm.
And it's you can see it. There's these think tanks in Washington D.C. that receive a lot of funding from sort of pro-corporate interests like the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, places like this, and they keep churning out books and articles and columns talking about how the postal service needs to be privatized. It would be better for the postal service to be privatized, et cetera. So it's this constant, like you're saying, this constant sort of drumbeat going on, and it's for decades. And the thing is, if you are a right-wing libertarian, which these people are, it's kind of been like the crown jewel of privatization is to get the postal service, because it is this agency that we all interact with on a regular basis. It employs over 600,000 federal workers. So taking this down and privatizing it would really be for them a great success.
What would it do to America's middle class? As I shared earlier, African Americans, Black people in America have really been pushed into the public sector because of racism, quite frankly. And so that is where we really got more of a fair shot, in with these civil servant jobs, and particularly with the post office. I mean, that's where you got, I mean, because when you get a good government job, you can get a loan, because you have a regular paycheck. I mean, there's a benefit to that, and I'm wondering what would happen to people um, if this is taken away.
Yeah, no, there's a long history. I mean, you brought up Black postal workers. The numbers shift around a little bit, but it's been around a quarter of postal workers in recent years are Black, and that's I think like twice the overall population, Black population in this country. So it's disproportionately you're seeing Black workers finding jobs at the postal service, and it's been that way, for a long time. That, as you're saying, had more of a fair shot. You could see that after the Civil War, starting in the late 19th century, where there was that opportunity there. And I think one thing that's instructive is to compare the largest employer in this country, civilian employer in this country, is at the moment is Walmart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Postal Service was actually recently passed by Amazon, but it's now the third largest. And you look at the difference between the wages and the benefits that people working at Walmart get compared to people working at the Postal Service, right? And the Postal Service, you have a pension, you earn, if you're a career employee, you earn a middle class living standard as a working class person. At Walmart, you are not going to get those kinds of wages. You're not going to get those kind of benefits. And that's basically the business model of Walmart, is in large measure based on low wage labor. So it would, privatization would be about trying to make those jobs more like Walmart jobs. I mean, just let's be honest about it. That's what it would be an important part of that push would be to try to affect that kind of a change.
When you say more like Walmart jobs, help me with that, because that's very unsettling. Because as Walmart famously or infamously, as part of their intake process, show their workers how to apply for public aid.
Yes.
And so help me with that. I mean, is that what we would be coming to?
It would be going in that direction. And as you say, I mean, Walmart knows that they pay their workers at such a level that they do qualify for public assistance, and they encourage they call them associates. They encourage their associates to take advantage of that. that is how Walmart does business, and it's not, it's not how the federal government does business, and not how the Postal Service does business. And so yeah,
Because you can sue the federal government. It gets the slope is much slipperier. It's much more slippery, shall I say, when it's private. Because in private businesses, Dr. Shaw, you can do what you wish because it's yours.
that's right. And and another I think relevant point to raise here has to do with unions, where Walmart has been absolutely opposed to unions. They do not want unions at all. I mean, they've shut down entire departments. They've shut down entire stores where the workers unionized. Whereas the Postal Service is about the most unionized sector of the economy that there is.
Mm-hmm.
There's four postal worker unions, and it's through that bargaining, the collective bargaining process, that that postal workers have been able to ensure that they are able to maintain that middle class standard of living through the bargaining power that they get by joining together in their unions. So that's another major distinction between a postal service that accepts unions and will actually bargain, with their workers, and a private sector company like Walmart that wants to do everything it can to prevent that and keep unions out of the workplace.
James Turner is saying that he wants you to talk about racism in the post office. Um, how much of an issue do you think that is as we're looking at this particular, as we're looking at this moment? I mean, really, the survival of it as in the public sector, because because the government by law has to do certain things a certain way. Um, but when you get into the private space, it changes. I mean, that's what it's very interesting. Like when you saw the the affirmative action lawsuits that went to the Supreme Court, there was one that was a public track, a public university, and a private university. They were decided a little differently, but it's very interesting. We in America we do have two different tracks, Dr. Shaw.
Yeah, I mean, what one thing I'll say is, so there was traditionally, or before the civil rights movement, there were Jim Crow locals in the postal unions, and so there was a separate black postal union called the National Alliance, and it still exists today. These days, it largely operates as a civil rights organization, and it does deal with cases where they think that there's discrimination and such. But this is another sort of institutional. You're talking about how there's these separate tracks, and this is another way that you have an institutional representative there in the workplace, that if there are these kinds of issues that people can access and take advantage of if they're having dealing with these kinds of issues. And again, in the private sector, that might not be as much the case, but certainly there was discrimination in the post office, historically, because of just living in a racist society. But it was also a case where there were more opportunities, there was more room to get a job and to get ahead in the post office than there was in the private sector, and that is a big part of the history of the Postal Service, and is explains why you've all had a disproportionately large number of black postal workers down through the years.
Who is Postmaster DeJoy? What is his background?
He's a wealthy corporate executive. He owns a logistics company in North Carolina, and he was a major donor to the Republican Party, and also was helping out with Trump, and sort of came out of the blue to become Postmaster General in 2020. And if we remember back to that, he came in and he just thought that he knew best, and he made all these operational changes where he was slowing down the mail and doing all these things, and it got everyone very concerned about the election that was coming up. And so you actually had then federal judges intervening and doing oversight, which was unprecedented, monitoring postal operations. But so he's a business executive, and he came into the position with the idea that I guess he would kind of whip things into shape and bring a business mindset and improve things. But this has meant that he's been not really doing a lot of listening to people and not been very receptive to criticism.
But upon what basis was he? What needed to be fixed? Help me. I'm trying to understand
Yeah.
how we got here, because that was, it was the mail delivery in the United States up until he disrupted it. His actions disrupted it. Was like the one something upon which you could depend. And I've never understood the attack upon government and government workers, because they are highly efficient. I mean, the checks that need to go out on time every month or whatever they're supposed to go out. I mean, they do. So I mean, upon what basis did he say that I've got I'm going to kill the sorting machines? Who does that? I mean,
Right.
the sorting machine. This is a nation of some estimates say 350 million people. Everybody uses the postal service. Maybe not 350 million people, but a lot of folks, tens of millions of people use it every day. Why would you disrupt the sorting machines? What is the thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I never heard a good answer to that one. I don't think
Okay.
there is. But the background of this all has to do with the finances of the agency. And so the
Oh.
thing about the Postal Service is that, we put a stamp there, right? I mean, there's postage. So there's this revenue coming in. And so it's always been tempting to say, well, if we could just get that revenue from postage to cover the entire cost of the operation of the service, wouldn't that be great? And so that's always been there as sort of an ideal objective or something like that. But the reality is that, again, this is a public service. It takes on a lot of operations and tries to do a lot of things that are not that do not turn a profit. And so historically, if you look at the postal system over that 200 plus year history, most years it did not make a profit. Most years it lost a little bit of money. And that was accepted as just being the normal course of events. Of course, you're not going to make money taking mail to Hawaii. I mean, it's just, there's going to be a little bit of a loss. And the thing is, it is a pretty well run operation. It's pretty efficient. So for the most part, most of the expenses are covered by postage, but not all of them. And if there's a little deficit, then the government would step in and make up that difference. In 1971, the Post Office Department, because it had been a cabinet level department, was transitioned into the United States Postal Service. And so this is a government agency. And the real important thing here was now it was going to be entirely self-funded through postage. And so, that's a struggle. And depending on the year, some years it's been able to do that, and other years it hasn't. But it means that it's always under sort of a financial pressure. And so for someone like DeJoy, he comes in and says, oh, well, I'm going to cut this and, reduce this many employees and all these things and cut expenses, right? And then that will get us to the stage where we are, entirely self-funding and there's no issue where we might lose a little money. But, the other thing about it is the Postal Service is designed to be operating break even. Right? It's not like even looking to generate a profit. So there's an issue here with the fact that this is a public service, but it often doesn't get treated like a public service. People kind of would like to think it could operate like a business. And that's sort of a debate. And if you look at Congress, back in the past, this was a debate that people had, those who thought it should be public service, those who thought it should be more like a business. This has been an ongoing discussion. But sort of that's the underlying issue there that allows someone like Postmaster General DeJoy to come in and say, okay, I'm going to slow down the mail. I'm going to, get rid of this equipment and any other changes he wants to make in order to try to save money.
But it's necessary equipment. And they don't apply that same standard to businesses that get significant public or government funding. I mean, look at Boeing. Boeing has some astronauts stuck in space.
Yeah.
They'll be there almost a year. Only heaven knows what's going to happen to their health. We know the impact that just a simple trip to space for a week or two, or just even a trip, it impacts bone density, cardiac health, and on and on. No one's talking about that. They're going to get their allotment of money from the government, and we're going to keep on going. Why is it that that which is public is held to a standard that business is not held to, Dr. Shaw? They don't hold businesses to. They don't, we can't, the Pentagon has failed their audit for 7 consecutive years.
I completely agree about the different standards. I mean, one way this was very obvious in the not too distant past was in 2020 when, COVID struck and the whole economy was in turmoil. The airlines were getting, privately owned airlines were getting massive money as bailouts. And that was sort of taken as a normal course of events. And the Postal Service came along and wanted a little extra credit from the Treasury. And there was this, all this debate about it. And, that it did happen, but it was not treated with the same sort of generous attitude, that these private businesses were.
Oh no, you're being very kind. Generous. I mean, they have given. I mean, and they've pulled the public in on that, and I think that's what's so disturbing too, because it has really been a chipping away at the excellent job that our postal workers do, and now they're having to do much more with much less.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that is what's unsettling. They are being forced to. How do you? They're having to sort mail by hand.
I mean, yeah. Postal workers. One thing that's been ongoing is, they are short staffed. They just are. They don't have.
No, I need you to say that one more time so the people.
They are shorthanded at the Postal Service. I mean, they're overburdened. And the thing is, there's a real cost. It's not just the cost to the patrons where the service suffers, where you have to wait in line longer at the post office. It's the cost to the postal workers themselves, because they're having to do all this overtime, and the cost to their family lives and their personal lives. I mean, it's really been very grueling for a lot of postal workers now for years, and that's because they just don't have enough. They don't have as many employees as they should. They just don't, in order to do the job that they exist to do, that the agency exists to perform.
But what happened with the employees? I mean, what's happened? I mean, because people do a lot of laughing about people going postal. There's a lot of pressure in the job too, because I think and it's a lot of it is self-applied, because there's pride that they have in their work, and they have a reputation for a high level of efficiency. So I mean, why are they short-staffed now? I mean, has the budget been cut? I mean, have they been fired? What's going on? Because James Turner had a really tough time. He had 2 routes for 89 days, he said, and then he was fired. But it takes you 90 days to get into the union. I mean, so I'm wondering if I don't think that James has an outlier story. I mean, it seems that it's almost like they're culling the herd. I mean, that's a crude term, but.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of stories like that where you have overburdened postal workers where they're being asked to deliver 2 routes and just et cetera, on and on and on. And if you talk to postal workers, they'll tell you that like stress is higher than it's ever been before in the workplace there. I think one thing that happens is this is in some ways, I think, a legacy of the 2007, 2008 financial crisis. And so whenever the economy in general suffers, what you see is that that leads to a decline in mail volume, and then the Postal Service's finances suffer. And so as the economy in general went into a bad recession at that point in time, the Postal Service is making adjustments, and they start to see one way that they can cut their costs is to reduce the number of employees that they have. And so they started to do that, and it kind of became a ongoing process that went on for years and years and years, where They are reducing the number of employees they have. And then, of course, the inevitable result of that is you have to shift that work burden onto the people who are still there. And that's what's happened. And, there's other things like as packages became a bigger part of the mail in the 2010s, the Postal Service then didn't really have the money and didn't make the investment in getting automation. So you had, it's better now than it was, but so you had a lot of workers there who are having to physically, sort and move around all these heavy packages, which hadn't been part of the job before. So there's just a lot of impact that hit the employees when you are not investing properly in the agency. And so Mr. Turner, his story is there are a lot of others out there with similar stories.
There are, and there are a lot of others, and so my question then becomes, where does the post office, where are they planning to go? Do you think that these business persons, the oligarchs, if you will, Elon Musk was able to, or at least he and his team, because people don't function by themselves, everybody. You function as a team. And the presidency is structured that way. But he is like the face for oligarchs. He was able to kill a bipartisan budget deal to keep the government open. And so I'm saying and this is not unique to the Trump administration, Dr. Shaw. This is something that's, the quiet part is now being said out loud about everything. They run the place. So, this becomes, a question about where will this work this time? Because this is, like you said, since the 70s, that's 50 years. And These people don't live, from payday to Monday. These folks have decades-long plans to do whatever it is that they need to do.
Right.
So where are we with this?
Well, to a certain extent, it's impressive just that the American people have been able to withstand this onslaught so far. And I one thing I will say is that what happened in 2020 when DeJoy came in and caused total chaos was very encouraging in terms of the response that he triggered, where people became very engaged. They made their voices heard. Congress heard what they were saying, and action was taken. And DeJoy had to roll back a number of those changes. And that is one thing about the Postal Service is, Congress does have this oversight function there. Now, Congress has a lot on its plate. It's busy doing a lot of other things. A lot of times it wouldn't want to put the effort into doing kind of providing sort of oversight it should for the Postal Service. But if it hears from the constituents that the Postal Service is important, it will take action. And I think more and more they are hearing that because, just the other week, DeJoy was up on Capitol Hill testifying, and there's a photo that's circulating that got a lot of attention where he was getting criticized actually by a Republican, and he put his hands over his ears, and basically said he didn't want to hear the criticism, and, that he thought he was doing a great job. He gave himself an A. So, Congress matters, and voters matter when they let members of Congress know what they think and that they care about this issue.
Robert is saying that, well, let me see, it is Robert. No, James. And James clearly had a very challenging experience with the post office, because these jobs are not you just don't walk onto them. They're not that easy to get.
No.
Please speak to that before I ask you the follow-up question.
Well, it's a process where, and this is one thing that does actually make it harder for the Postal Service to get the number of employees it should have, because you're handling the U.S. mail, right? The U.S. mail there's a lot of secure information in there. So there's background checks. There's a lengthy process that takes a couple months often before you can get hired. It's not like you can just, walk in, fill in your application, and you're delivering mail the next day or sorting it or something like that. So it's a job that it takes a while to get, and you have to have certain qualifications to be able to handle the U.S. mail.
Well, and it seems that, and James was making the point, and I keep going back to him, but he's I guess he's representing so many people who've been in the Postal Service, being let go a day before he would have gotten his full benefits and would have been in the service. There is, I think, a misimpression that most of the Postal Service is black, which makes it, you know, it makes it just much, it makes it much more vulnerable in the public space because we still diminish black contributions, unfortunately. We do. And so now, um, it's like when you're closing when you want to privatize the service and whip it into shape, you're whipping black workers into shape. I've never understood that, Dr. Shaw, because you don't bring lazy people um, over to the Americas to work. We're not. Black people have never been lazy. And if we were lazy, we wouldn't have been brought over here to work. And you don't hire. It's like having a lazy farmer. No such thing. And you can't have a postal worker who's not dependable. I don't care what their color is.
Right.
You depend upon them, and they show up at the same time just about every day. I mean, in the same window, they hit their marks. Um, why is it? Why do we have the impression that it's just that this is a black department? That not that it would be anything wrong with it, but that is the impression that has.
Yeah. I mean, there are most postal workers. Yeah, most postal workers are not black. I mean, there are like Chicago. For instance, is a very high proportion of black postal workers. But one thing about just talking, historically, which you brought up with your experience in your own family. Black postal workers really had to push and fight to get those jobs. And the thing is, like,
they were not given.
No, they were not. And like, if you go back in the early part of the 20th century, sort of the elite of the Postal Service workers was the railroad mail clerks. These were the people who sorted the mail while it was moving between cities on the train. And that was one branch of the Postal Service where there was a lot of resistance from the white clerks to having them black coworkers in those cars sorting mail alongside them. And there were still a number of black postal workers, and they had to kind of perform to a higher standard to get those positions and to break into that. So that's the history. Is that black postal workers had to work even harder than anyone else did in order to open up those kinds of positions in the first place. So I that is the actual history.
But it is the history. I mean, and I think but the fact is, it has been a place where people of all backgrounds, where Americans could go perform a public service, a public good, and they could do good and do well at the same time.
Right.
And I'm wondering what that does to the country when we only admire people who are billionaires or on track to become trillionaires. Our heroes are no longer the average working person. The people upon whom we depend, the people who make the country work.
Yeah.
The postal workers, Dr. Christopher Shaw, they make the country work.
That's right. Yeah, they bind it together. The postal workers are like the backbone of this country alongside all the other working people. And I think you're right that in our culture, there's a lot of celebration of the Elon Musks, but it's the person who punches in and does the job day in and day out that makes it all work and makes everything function for us all and built this country.
So just as we look at this, let me ask you, what was the inspiration for your book? I only have a couple of minutes here, but I do want to ask you this, and I thank you for really opening our minds. And James says that I guess the final word from you, James, is that you are a Navy veteran, and we thank you for devoting your life to that kind of service. But people who serve us, we don't honor in this country. There was a time when a teacher was honored. when doctors, they were honored. My father talks about, people who elevated public health over personal wealth. There's something that's happened to the country and to the culture that to me is very, very dangerous. But what was the inspiration for your book? Because I was struck by First Class. I'm always looking for things. I guess that's the artist in me. First Class, the U.S. Postal Service, democracy, and the corporate threat. I mean, because you went from first class, democracy, service. That's on one side of the equation. And on the other side is a corporate threat that threatens to undo all of that, I think.
Right.
Or am I reading too much into it?
No. I mean, I'm a believer in democracy, right? And I think it's a great aspiration to try to live in a democratic society. And I think that the Postal Service gives us some insight on what the society might look like, and also the idea that we can, all of us, share in the first class government service, right? All of us can sort of get first class treatment in a democratic society. But I think that it is threatened by a corporate model that's just as interested in profit and putting profit over everything else. So that's what that title is about.
Well, I hope everyone gets the book. Put this under your Christmas tree, everybody. It's a fantastic book. I've ordered 3. Yes. Well, I guess, in memory of, Julius Brown uh, and the man whose name I carry, Charles Henry Jackson. And I thank God for them. First class, the U.S. Postal Service, democracy, and the corporate threat. Everybody, really. And, be nice to your postal worker. We depend upon them every day. They bind us together as a nation. They do. They do. When you drop your mail into that mailbox, you know it's going to get there. You just walk away. You know it's going to get there. You don't even think about it. Think about that. Think about that. Dr. Christopher Shaw, I want to thank you for your work. Thank you for this service of this wonderful book. I can't wait to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Oh, it's been wonderful talking with you. Thank you. You brought up my granddad's for me today, and I really appreciate that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless. Coming up, everybody, let's talk about what Kamala Harris will do next. You're on the Santita Jackson Show.